Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Simon and Jordan coming to you with Laurent Drouhin from Westchester, New York. Hello, Laurent.
Hi, guys.
So, we're grateful to have you because we're going to cover a lot of topics in an hour. So, let's just start a little bit of an introduction about you. So, let's talk about Laurent Drouhin and just an overview of Joseph Drouhin.
Bonjour à tous, that's first. And so I'm the fourth generation, and I have two brothers and one sister. We all are running Joseph Drouhin today. My older brother, Philippe, is the estate manager. He runs all the vineyards, both in Burgundy and Oregon. Veronique, my sister, is the winemaker for Oregon, and my younger brother, Frédéric, is the president, and I'm covering all North America, Canada, United States, as well as the Caribbean. And Joseph Drouhin, I said fourth generation because back in time, it started with Joseph Drouhin, our great-grandfather, who pretty much started as a négociant. Financially, he did not have the resources to buy or to own any vineyards, so he started dealing and buying fruits or must from other growers and aging them in his cellar at the 7 Rue d'Enfer. That's the address we still have today. That's our main office. And he was quite successful, and he did that from 1880 until 1918 when my grandfather, Maurice Drouhin, took over. And in 1921, thanks to Maurice Drouhin, that was the birth of the domain with the acquisition of the first few acres of Beaune Premier Cru called Clos des Mouches. So it all started, the 204 acres we own today started in 1921 with the Clos des Mouches. So next year we're celebrating 100 years of the acquisition of the first few acres not hectares, but ouvres, as we say in Burgundy, which represent 1/24 of an hectare. In Burgundy. And from there, obviously, my grandfather continued to develop and wanted to buy some more vineyards, which he was able to do. And also continued to develop the relationship with the growers. He was the exclusive distributor for Domaine de la Romanée-Conti wines in France and in Belgium. He was also the exclusive distributor, not the winemaker, but the distributor for the wines of the Laguiche family with Le Montrachet and the Chassagne Montrachet Premier Cru Morgeau. And so on. Wartime was a tough time for him, obviously. And I recommend the book Wine and War, by the way, because we don't have the time, but it's a great book. Yeah. And I would say, voila, in 1959, my father, Robert, took over, and my father, we say more the modern era. Why is that? Because he's the one who moved away from Burgundy, well, not from Burgundy, from the Côte de Beaune and Côte de Nuits, and went to the Chablis region. That was at the time of the Trente Glorieuses as well, so the economic boom in the world, and started to travel the world along with André Gaget and Louis Latour, and trying to explain and to put Burgundy in the face of the world. He was among the few people in Burgundy to speak English at that time fluently, and expand the distribution, continue to buy vineyards. And in recently, I would say like maybe 10 years ago, even though he's still over there, he passed it on to us as the fourth generation. So we now run 284 acres in Burgundy. And we have about a little bit more than 500 acres in Oregon, with Domaine Drouhin Oregon in Dundee Hills, as well as Eola Hills with Rose Rock Pinot Noir. And we're already training the fifth generation.
Oh,
and
wow.
Laurent, my niece, is already 1 foot in the company, actually, or starting officially this month. And maybe one or two others of that generation will step in. But when I say we're already training them, meaning they're already drinking wines. And so we start with that. So voila. So we're a propriétaire, négociant, éleveur, and I insist on the fact that we're very, very proud of being the three of that. Propriétaire, owning vineyards, négociant, dealing with growers, extraordinary people. We're able to select good crop and good from good origin, and éleveur, because we never in our history of the wine buy a finished wine that we label and we sell. All the wines are going through the cellar and for the aging process.
Okay.
And the style of Joseph Drouhin in 1880 was complexity, elegance, and finesse. It sounds like everybody is saying this today. We've been saying this for 140 years. And remember in the 80s, that was about big, extracted, bold, deep, dark. Even for Burgundy, there was a move for more of that, more oaky wine. We never gave up on our style, which was seen to be kind of a lighter style at that time. And it looks like today, it's back in people's mind and for the finesse and the elegance. And also the philosophy is to truly capture the diversity of Burgundy and the message given by various terroirs and to bring that into the bottle. And I think we've been pretty successful in doing so. And the reputation of Joseph Drouhin remains where it is or where it has been for quite some time now.
Okay. Let's take this step by step because we're going to cover two wines and we're going to cover both Burgundy and Oregon in our short time. If you had to explain to someone who didn't understand wine a lot, and you had to explain Burgundy in a sort of a shortened Cole's Notes kind of way, because you were saying that you had 204 acres under vine in Burgundy. Mm-hmm. I think where a lot of people may not understand like how epic that amount of vineyard is in Burgundy. Maybe let's just start with that, a little bit of an introduction into Burgundy and what makes Burgundy special.
Well, Burgundy is a patchwork of vineyards located mainly on kind of a hillside facing east-southeast. And when I say a patchwork, it's not one piece of land with the same soil from north to south and east to west. It's you're taking various components from one place to another one. When I say one place to another one, sometimes there is a terroir, there's the size of a football field, and that's it. And then next to it is another vineyard planted, and those two wines will be completely different. But the size also of Burgundy is very small. Côte de Nuit is 1,500 hectares. I'm doing hectares there, but you multiply by 248 for those who are acres. And the Côte de Beaune is 3,000 hectares. Okay, and it's a little bit more than 9,000 in the Chablis region, and I think it's 6,500 as well in the Mâconnais region. All this to say that when I say it's a patchwork, it's usually little what we call les climats. And les climats designates a specific location on the hillside. So if you're in the middle of it, you have a certain drainage and components in the soil and an exposure. And that's where usually you find the Grand Cru. So you have a very small amount of places right in the middle of the hillside where you have that Grand Cru. It's surrounded by the Premier Cru, where the drainage is good, but not as good as that tiny location, which is the Premier Cru, which is the Grand Cru. And then you have the village level. So there is 3 levels of appellation in Burgundy. There is village, Premier Cru, and Grand Cru. And at the bottom of it, they would say Bourgogne. So that would be an additional 4th, what we call the régional. So when there's 33 Grand Cru, there is 564 Premier Cru, and I think there is 45 village appellations. All this to say is because of the size of Burgundy, which is very small, you have more than 6,000 producers in Burgundy. Because of the Napoleon law, I mean, it is so fractured, not only physically because of that stretch, but among all the growers, all the owners. So when you own 84 hectares or 204 acres, it is quite a big chunk of that region considering the amount of people who do own. Sometimes you just have 1 row or 2 rows. We have 0.67 hectares, so a little less than more than a hectares of Musigny. That's it. That's all. And the production of that specific one is maximum on a good vintage, a generous vintage would be 180 cases. That's it for the entire world. And if you take Le Montrachet, the specific Le Montrachet, it's a 20 acres piece of land with 33 different owners. So Clos Vougeot is another good example. It's 54 hectares. There is 80 different owners. And that 54 hectares are on the hillside. The top of it is the best. The bottom of it is not as good, let me say so. So depending when you own, you're going to have a difference from there to the bottom. So that is not only the terroir, but how so fractured it is physically and among the ownership as well. So that makes us, I think, is the fifth or the sixth largest landowner. And by the way, everything we own is basically Premier Cru and Grand Cru. And in Chablis, is 60% is Premier Cru and Grand Cru. So you cannot see Burgundy as a whole strip of land on which you have vineyards with chateau on it, and that's it. And everybody is dealing with the same soil. No, it's because geologically, we're talking about going back to the Jurassic time when you started with Les Vosges. It was a seabed first, and then there was a fracture, and then Les Vosges came up on the northeast, and then Le Morvan in the center of France pulled up and pushed those sediments. And then you have the Alps, which are southeast, and I'm talking quite far. And because of more recently, it pulls the soil. I mean, there was so much pressure and cracks and fracture. So instead of laying layers of sediments like this, you have layers of sediment like this, or like this, or like this, and then sometimes an interaction with another one. So basically at the end, you have a soil that is like this. Well, from there to this, soil is completely different. And you can be in Montrachet, and the other side of the road, you're in Bâtard Montrachet. And that would be two complete different wine, even if there is like then less than 6 meters away from the land.
It's funny, Laurent, what you're describing is both Simon and I have gone down to the Pinot Camp in Oregon. And what you're describing is almost word for word what they describe as the topography and soil diversification in Oregon. They use the analogy of a stack of pancakes that got knocked over, and that's.
I never heard that. I love it.
Yeah, well, that's what they were saying, and just to because we're trying both the Côte du Bon, and we are trying I believe it's the Dundee Hills. And I was wondering if you could speak to, because I believe it was probably out of all the Burgundy families, it was the Drouhin family that saw the similarities first between Oregon and Burgundy.
Actually, I have, we have to give credit first for the pioneers in Oregon. Steve Carey, David Edelsheim, David Lett, called the Papa of Pinot. Yes. But my father did a trip to Oregon in the 60s and met some of those guys who were trying to produce wines over there. I'm not saying successfully, but they were trying. And my father tasted a few and, recognized maybe something in it. And in the late 70s, still in touch with those growers, David Lett organized a tasting comparing Burgundy Pinot with Oregon Pinot Noir. And among the wines tasted was the 1976 South Block from David Lett. And my father just offered also a few of the Burgundies. And among the few wines rated first was David Lett's wine. So my father kept that in the back of his mind. He said, there is definitely what I've seen 20 years ago or 15 years ago, I see it today. I mean, there is still some improvement to be made, but the potential is there. So he was indeed the very, very, very first one outside of Burgundy, and I would say based in Beaune, going all the way to Oregon. And he bought in 1987, so it's 33 years ago. He bought 225 acres in Dundee Hills. There was Christmas trees and wheat planted. But David Edelsheim had told my father, I believe this is a great spot for Pinot. The orientation is great. It's probably one of the greatest places around here. And it turns out that Dundee Hill is indeed one of them. So definitely, if you speak to the people in Oregon who welcomed us, very friendly, open arms, they helped us. I mean, they're tremendous people. But they said the turning point for the region was when Robert Drouhin decided to go and invest in Oregon and build a winery and started planted high density using Dijon clone mainly from the beginning. I mean, it changes the whole dynamic, and all the projectors that were on California at that time for the Pinot started to look at Oregon and look at Oregon today. I think that when my father invested in the mid 80s, there was like 25 or 27 wineries, kind of wineries. There is more than 800 today. The turning point was our arrival, and I have to give credit to my father for that.
Do you think it's your father that kind of gave the region legitimacy? I don't want to say legitimacy, that's not the right word, but it's sort of taken a little more seriously than...
I don't want to sound pretentious whatsoever, but with the help of those growers already based in Oregon, yes.
Yeah.
He did.
Okay.
And that was a time California was the big talking point. Everybody was the focus was on California exclusively. And even when my father went to Oregon, some people say, Oregon, where is that? Or some other Oregon? Why do you go to Oregon? This is California. This is the place for the wine, California. And same thing. Bob Mondavi was a good friend of my father. Said, Robert, you should invest in California. He said, I believe that the climate is probably, the weather is probably too hot for Pinot in California, and I'd rather be a little bit up north. And yeah, voila, that's the story.
Let's talk a little bit stylistically. I mean, I know this could be a very long and tricky question. But let's talk a little bit, like, if you had to, again, umbrella the differences in terms of in the glass between the Côte de Beaune, like we have here, versus Oregon. Like, what are some of the common themes that you see between the two regions, and how do they differ amongst each other?
Okay, I didn't speak about the soil. So the soil in Burgundy is limestone dominant and clay and marl. There could be a little bit of gravels there and there, but it's basically limestone. And Oregon is a volcanic soil, and it's a red crushed basalt. Having said that, that has a huge impact, obviously, on the wine. Weather-wise, it's on the same parallel of Burgundy, and the amount of rain that we receive in Oregon and in Burgundy is fairly similar. That may vary from one vintage to another one, but bottom line, if you look at the average over those years, it's pretty much the same. The way it rains or it's spread out is different. July and August tend to be very dry in Oregon, when we can still have a good amount of rain in Burgundy in July and August. So all this will give you differences into the wine. And I have to say that obviously the main impact is the soil itself, considering the weather is fairly similar. The wines of Burgundy might be overall more red fruit or light black fruit oriented with earthiness, and you don't have the earthiness in Oregon. This is more silkier tannins, softer tannins, but deeper and more black fruit oriented. So spicy, less earthy, and rounder in Oregon versus earthy and more and more tiny red fruit in Burgundy. And I'm talking about young wines. When it ages, we start having experience there that tend to get back together. So that's the main difference. So if you're in Oregon, you will see the color is darker or deeper. And on the nose, you will tend to have more darker fruit than what you have in Burgundy. And the earthiness is hard to describe, but it's kind of a texture feel that you have among with the tannins and on the palate.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see, I mean, one of the things I always explain to a lot of customers who are unfamiliar with Burgundy is a lot of times when you start to go into the Premier Cru, into the Grand Cru, you know, these are oftentimes wines that demand a good amount of cellaring, at least to show them what really, to highlight the differences in the terroir between, you know, village to village, or, you know, even clos to clos. Whereas I feel like Oregon may or may not demand as much cellaring. Perhaps is that, where does cellaring fit into both regions in terms of how it highlights each region?
Well, it goes down also to what you expect or what you like in the wine. If you like the wine in its primary stage, obviously you're not going to keep the wines, and the Grand Cru are going to give you right away what you want, even though you're not going to get the full potential of what they could give you. Uh, it is true that because of what I was describing on the earthiness and the overall texture and the grip that you have in the Burgundy for the Grand Cru, that they tend to need more cellars to combine and to get all together. The elements might be there, but they need time to reveal and express their food potential. When because of that more softness and approachable tannins in the Oregon wine and the fact that it's slightly more intense or bigger, and again, I'm not saying heavier, but bigger, the wines tend to be tend to be pleasant and easy to approach right away. We only have 30 years of experience in Oregon. We know that they have potential to age, and they're delivering, and they're getting close to the Burgundy. But Grand Cru should, and I cannot force anybody, but Grand Cru from Burgundy should be enjoyed after a good 7 to 8 years in bottle, well kept, and then you start drinking them. And you really start feeling what the Grand Cru is. And of course, you can age them much, much longer than that if it is a prestigious Grand Cru in an extraordinary vintage. Oregon delivers almost everything right away. But the interesting thing is that if it is a great vintage as well, that delivering will last for long. So, and the Oregon do not go into that kind of a close and shut down stage, or not as intense as you do have in Burgundy. So it's always very tricky because it depends on the palate, depends on what you like. But it is true that overall, Grand Cru should be enjoyed after years in bottles versus the wines from Oregon, at least now, will be different years from now, but they are very much enjoyable right now. Right. But I like the fact that you have here a Côte de Beaune and the DDO, because the Côte de Beaune is one of those wines that is approachable and that is drinking great in its youth.
Yeah. And I thought that was sort of a key too, because you need two wines side by side. I mean, obviously they're very different, but both drinkable now, because it's not fair to pick a Bourgogne that's sort of like, okay, well, it needs some time yet before you really kind of highlight it versus, like I say, a DDO where it's very much like, yeah, this is very approachable. This is very friendly. We can get at it right away. In terms of winemaking, is it a common winemaking tech, or is it generally winemaking the same in Oregon to Burgundy, or are you doing different things in the cellar to highlight the differences?
No, I have to say that the winemaking process is the same. It's Veronique. It's like close to an 18 days where we sort out the grapes first, and depending on the vintage, obviously we do a destemming, a light destemming, whole cluster, but the whole cluster you have to have a very healthy crop. So on the same vintage there might be differences, but overall we have the same approach of making it. Veronique does. And then it's about 18 days to 21 days maceration and fermentation. We tend to do a cold maceration for about 3 days or so, and then we let it start, both in Burgundy and Oregon. The pigeage and the remontage could be a little bit different. We might tend to do a little bit more pigeage in Burgundy than what we do in Oregon, because we don't want to extract more than what we already get out of the skin and the phenolic in Oregon. And then from there, aging in the barrels, we try to keep them on the lees, but not for too long. The proportion on those two wines on new barrel is 100% barrel malolactic fermented, which is most of the time completed for both, and 20%, 30%, depending on the ripeness of the vintage or the level of acidity or what Veronique really wants to get. But bottom line, yes, it is a very, very similar winemaking process.
Okay. Do you find one more approachable than the other, or is it pretty much? I guess it's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's sort of like if they're made the same way, they should in theory drink the same. But do you feel like they actually drink the same, or do you think that it's almost in some cases where the Oregon will appeal more to a particular market than say the Burgundy wines?
I would say regarding being approachable, I would say that Oregon tends to be more approachable in its youth than Burgundy overall. Of course, a wine like Bourgogne Rouge or a Côte de Nuit village or a Côte de Beaune village tend to be approachable. But even though a very young Oregon will be more approachable than a very young Burgundy. Yeah, I mean, if personally, if I tend to drink something fairly young, I say, oh, I really want to have something young tonight, I tend to go to Oregon. Could be this one, Rose Rock, Cloudline, you name it. But I tend to go because of the fact that again, it goes down to the texture of the tannins and the fact that there is a nice silkiness overall that makes the wine approachable. So but I like after 2 or 3 years, Côte de Beaune start drinking beautiful as well. Yeah, it's very different.
Well, and Clos de Mouche is a bone, isn't it? It's from.
What's interesting about the Côte de Beaune, it has some of the young vines of the Clos de Mouche are blended into the Côte de Beaune. So it's a small amount, but still there is some. And that's what gives that sort of extra dimension for a basic Côte de Beaune. And you have to keep in mind a little bit of education here. Côte de Beaune comes exclusively from the appellation Beaune, okay? Exclusively from Beaune, meaning a Marange, a Centenay, a Chorel-et-Beaune cannot be blended into Côte de Beaune. It can be blended to produce a Côte de Beaune village, okay? And so there is no vineyards planted that will automatically produce a Côte de Beaune village. It exists exclusively by the declassified various villages from the Côte de Beaune. When there is, and we own some, there is vineyards planted on the Beaune appellation, and it's called, the wine you produce out of those grapes is called Côte de Beaune. But you can also declassify the Beaune Premier Cru, like the Beaune Premier Cru Champimont, some young vines of l'Écrat, les Sizy, le Clos des Avaux. Well, there's many of Beaune, or even les Terrons, or les Epnotes. I mean, you can declassify that and blend all those and name it Côte de Beaune. So bottom line, the Côte de Beaune tends to be at a higher level in terms of quality, potential for aging, structure than a Côte de Beaune village.
And following up on that, Laurent, I've always been a fan of the wines of Beaune, being impatient as I am. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to the difference between the wines of Beaune versus wines from Côte de Nuit, or stuff like Gevrey Chambertin, or stuff that finds itself a little more structured.
Yeah, the wines of the Côte de Nuit are, I would say, more complex, more refined, tend to be more delicate, even for wines like of Gevrey Chambertin or Moret Saint-Denis. There is in the wines of the Côte de Beaune that sort of touch of salty and complexity and finesse and refinement then you do not find most of the time in the Beaune area, in the Côte de Beaune area, starting with Beaune. The only one that would look alike would be the wine of Volnay. That would be the most feminine in the approach, in the expression of the fruit itself. So it's a texture thing comparing the two. But it is true that there tend to be more masculine, square character, if I may use that, in the Beaune wine, and more feminine and salty and French elegance in the Côte de Nuit wines.
That's an excellent description. Conversely, I was wondering if you could perhaps speak to Dundee Hills as an appellation, as opposed, because of course it's so rare that we have an expert in like 2 places. Dundee Hills, as opposed to the other areas around. First, I don't know if everyone knows, but the Domaine Drouhin in Oregon has also the Rose Rock estate, which is further south in Eola Amity. And I was wondering perhaps if you could at least contrast those 2 AVAs, because we're drinking the Dundee Hills tonight. Okay.
Well, it's interesting. And then when I say we're still learning in Oregon, that's the beauty of it. We're learning, we're discovering. they're both red crush basalt, and it's Jory and Nikaya in Dundee Hills, and it's called Jory, Nikaya, and Rittner in Eola, and meaning there is some more pebbles in Eola than you do find in Dundee Hills. That's things number one. Secondly, the elevation of the vineyards is a little bit higher, not by much though, but there is a slight difference between Eola and Dundee Hill. The main difference also is that it's a cooler climate in Eola that it is in Dundee Hills. Why is that? Because there is a wind, it's on a wind corridor that is called the Van Duzer corridor. And the Van Duzer corridor brings some coolness directly from the Pacific. And because of that, the impact on the wine is that if I do the parallel with Burgundy, it's like being Chambol-Musigny in Dundee Hill and Gevrey-Chambertin in Eola. So you do have that maybe less tannic structure and obvious tannins and square tannins in Dundee Hill, and a little bit more masculine, a little bit more squared in Eola. So when you do taste the two wines side by side, you feel that different. The aromatics or the flavor profile tend to be very similar. Again, you're talking nuances there, but the way it is carried by the structure of the wine, it will give you a difference. And it's a subtlety, but it's not that a subtlety, because I've been trying to convince my wife to like DDO for many, many years, and she never clicked with the wine. It's just the way it is, until she had the first vintage of Rose Rock, 14. And she's not a New World person regarding the wine. And she said, I love that. And I said, well, that's the Rose Rock. And occasionally I take both. I do a blind and I say, oh, try this. And she said, nah, not my thing. That must be DDO. And sometimes it's like, yep, it's not Burgundy and I like it, so it must be Rose Rock. So that difference in the expression, in the texture, speaks to me as there is terroir in Oregon, but we're just at the dawn of understanding what the terroir of Oregon. We have 600 years in Burgundy, we only have 30 years in Oregon. So that's the difference between Eola and Dundee Hill. So if you're looking for something more softer, refined, more feminine, I would say go for DDO. If you like, or if you're having a food with some spicy notes, a little bit more intense, that needs a wine with some punch in the back, go for Rose Rock.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. You kind of touched on it a little bit. I'm curious to see what, from a winemaking perspective and as a consumption, from a Frenchman's perspective, like how. And I've asked. Let me backtrack a bit. When I was at Dundee or at the Oregon Pinot Camp, I sat with Jean-Nicolas Meillard, and he started a new winery, but I think they were only in their third or fourth vintage, called Nicholas J. And I was at a dinner and I was asking him, like, sort of like what sort of drives the Burgundian winemaker to Oregon now? Like, obviously you said your father kind of pioneered that, but obviously as time's gone on, more and more see it. And one of the things he said to me was, you can imagine the freedom that you have. Like when you're in Burgundy, there's so many constraints of, you can do this, you can't do this, you can only do this. Like, it's like for me, like, it was sort of like, well, I would never blend Clos Vougeot and, Gevrey-Chambertin. Like it would never be done. Like, but in Oregon, I can experiment. I can do things. If I want to blend, fruit from Ribbon Ridge to Dundee Hills and see what I come up with, I can do all these different things. So there's a lot of creativity there. But on the flip side of that coin, of that creativity, is it as taken as seriously as Burgundy? Again, same conference. I asked your sister Veronique, is sort of like, how seriously is the Domaine Drouhin stuff taken in France? And she said originally it wasn't it was sort of like, it was a bit of a novelty, but as time's gone on, more and more people have kind of gravitated towards it as, this is serious wine. This is something that we can take seriously. It's not just a novelty. So maybe speak to those two comments.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely true that there is definitely more freedom because there is, even though there's AVA in Oregon, it's not appellation d'origine contrôlée. So you do have the freedom if you want to irrigate, for example, the amount of crop you can get out of it. I mean, if you want to blend Dundee Hill, Yam Hill, Red Hill, you want to play with all that. I mean, you can pretty much do what you want in Oregon versus Burgundy. Well, the constraints are very tight because of the AOC system. But I think when you start planting and being an adventurer or a pioneer, you want to have that freedom to experiment. And if you are true to yourself, true to your philosophy, and you really want to bring out the best of a certain region or a new wine region, at some point you're gonna restrain yourself of doing all kind of experiments. Once you have a few guidelines, you know that why should I blend Dundee Hill and Eola Hill when there is a typicity in Dundee Hill? Why not working specifically on that? It's just one example. Why not highlighting that typicity of it? So instead of being an Oregon Pinot Noir that might or might not be taken seriously as a wine region in the future, well, the Pinot Noir is one of the most difficult grape variety to grow with. But what we all love in the Pinot Noir is its ability to deliver nuances, that complexity, those refinement, and you want to highlight that. So instead of blending everything so that you produce a red wine made out of Oregon and it's Pinot, no, you're doing a Dundee Hill. So if you want to be authentic and bring out the best of a region, you're going to naturally go to one direction of keeping yourself not experimenting as much. And it's like of a funnel, more likely over the years, and you're going to ultimately follow some rules. You know, the Cistercians in Burgundy did experiment at the 16th century. They did. And they did not exclusively blended some Chardonnay. They had the Pinot Blanc, they had the Pinot Barreau, they had all kind of red as well. But they narrowed down over the years that they said to bring out what is the soil, the subsoil, all that, the Pinot Noir is the best grape variety. Why bother doing other things? Because we nailed down. It's going to take years in Oregon, but I believe that we already know that Pinot Noir is the best grape variety for Oregon. You can start playing with a little bit of Chardonnay, but it's basically what it is. And that's the Burgundy approach to produce terroir wine. And if you want to produce terroir wine, you naturally concentrate and focus. But things like the Cuvée Lorraine, or the Rose Rock Zéphyrin, those are barrel selections. Okay, those are not lot selections. It's not single vineyards. And we constantly have that question, if I may explain very briefly. Why is that? Because Veronique will tell me or will tell you that, you know, it's hard to know precisely after 30 years which lot on our property at Dundee Hill is better than the others. We have a trend. There is a path now. We know that a few of them automatically every year when Veronique does the selection, she tastes, and then she looked at her book and said, yeah, that's again this lot. The 99, for example, goes into it. Every single year it goes into it. Well, this lot must be, let's say, a Premier Cru, and ultimately it's going to be a Grand Cru. But she said, I cannot specifically define, and that's the beauty of doing the experiment, that she can still blend this and this and this and work with it. So there is freedom. It's a great thing to the path of maybe automatically putting yourself with less freedom and more focus on the diversity of a specific region.
That's great.
But why Burgundy is so respected as well is that because of that AOC system, which is a pain to deal with, believe me, but that's how you get that diversity, and that's the beauty. I like it.
Because they figured it out and did their weird shit 300 years ago. If I may, Laurent, and I apologize for being probably the 207th person this month to ask, but Simon and I were at Domaine Drouhin, I think it was 2017, and we had just come up from California where the fires were happening, and of course this year is even worse for California. You have lots of people in Napa not doing a harvest. I know O'Shaughnessy is not doing a harvest. We talked to Spotswood the other day, and apparently they are. So it's hit and miss. But I do know that although the damage hasn't been as bad for the vineyards in Oregon, at least not that I know of, the issue of smoke taint is certainly something. I presume that harvest is done now in
Harvest,
the Willamette, or is it ongoing?
yeah, harvest just finished like yesterday.
Yeah.
We've been affected by the fire, indeed. Smoke stayed pretty much an entire week on the whole Willamette Valley. So that those molecules get on the skin and get through osmosis right inside of it. It's an issue. We did not harvest everything, most of it, but not everything. And the question is how we're going to deal with that smoke or those molecules that you might not get right away, but we know after the fermentation or after the malo, they might come up, how to deal with that. So it's a huge challenge this year, and we don't know yet what we're gonna do with the wines that we've been producing. Obviously, it's gonna be based exclusively on the taste and the blends, and if we believe that the wines are good to go, then we release them. If not, we won't. It's that simple. But Oregon has been affected by the smoke of the fire that was east of the winery, and it was really all the smoke went on the Willamette Valley. So it's been already a shitty year, and it's added even more to it. So because of that smoke, and that's sad because we're heading to a beautiful crop. Phenolic were perfect, healthy. I mean, that was looking fantastic, by the way.
And it all went south.
Yeah.
C'est la vie.
Yeah, I guess the last thing I was going to ask is, like, for many novice wine fans, if you had to give a couple pieces of advice of shopping Burgundy, because I think Burgundy, I often explain to people, it's sort of the rabbit hole a lot of wine geeks go down, because it's sort of the never-ending quest for knowledge, right? It's one place I like a lot of wine scholars that I know and people like that. That's sort of their mecca is Burgundy. Is trying to understand the nuances, but it can be a little complicated to someone who's not educated. Do you have any tips or tricks to things to navigate a Burgundy wine section in a wine shop?
I would. It's hard as a question, but for someone who wants to get with Burgundy for the first time, don't be shy and speak with the manager, the wine specialist of the store. They will guide you based on what you like. I believe so. That's why we're not the only one. You are the ambassadors of Burgundy, guys, and so you know your clientele. If tomorrow I walk into a store and I said, I want to discover Piemonte, I mean, just guide me and ask a few questions to the specialist. And if you want to be on your own, don't pick the most expensive bottle of wine right away. No, I wouldn't recommend so. I would say just go with an average. And try it. And so if you like it, you're happy, and then you have an indication or a starting point. And if you're not, you didn't spend a fortune in a bottle of wine that you didn't like, and you can try something else. But when you go from zero and you push the door of Burgundy, push it with someone who will welcome you on the other side and say, okay, let me guide you very easily. What do you like? You like big, heavily extracted wine, and you really want to go in Burgundy? Well, that might not be the kind of wine you like, but there is a wine like Gevrey, there is the wine like Pommard, there is wine like Alos Corton, and so on. You might go for that. Try it, and don't bother trying to understand right away the Premier Cru, the Grand Cru, and everything. It keeps in mind that it's one grape variety for the red and one for the white, and it's all location, location, location. That's it. But be on your own to discover Burgundy. It's kind of a challenge no matter what. You have to have some wine. Well, as I said, push the door, and on the other side, make sure someone's waiting for you to guide you.